Hey everybody, this is Dave Dugdale, learningDSLRvideo.com. So how fast is my brand new computer that I built? It's pretty fast, and I'm going to run through the numbers here in a second. But this video is really technical and it's long, and I promise you this will probably be the last computer hardware video I do for a while. It was actually good this past weekend. I went and shot a real estate video, which is a lot of fun, and maybe I'll share some of that footage with you guys some other time. But I think this video is packed with a lot of great information, especially if you do a lot of editing on your computer, whether it be Mac or PC. I think there's going to be some stuff in here that you might find valuable. So stick around and give it a watch. All right, before we get into the real technical part of the video, let me go over the fun benchmark scores that I got. First one is the Cinebench. I scored a 12.5. Luxmark score, which is really GPU intensive. I got a 680 when I overclocked that, and I got a 611 when I didn't overclock. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm not even gonna cover in this video, and this video is really long. It's probably a half hour long. There's a whole bunch more stuff on my site. I took notes, like a ton of notes in my book here as I was setting my system up, and I put all those notes pretty much right on my website page. And there's a bunch of charts and graphs and a whole bunch of goodness on the website. So definitely go there if you're looking for more information that you won't even get in this video. So one of the most important benchmarks I was looking for was the Premiere Pro benchmark. And the first time I submitted it like a week ago, it was rather disappointing. I came in like number 228 out of over 1,000 entries. I worked with Harm Millard. He gave me some suggestions on what I should try, made a whole bunch of suggestions, and again, those will be in the blog post, and that got me down to number 86. But it still seems like there's something weird going on, and we're trying to figure out what's happening, because I should be like in the top 50. And when I finally get that score, whatever it is, I will put it up here and let you guys know what my position is. I can't get to the very top position because those guys are using RAID arrays and I'm not using one yet. So I'll never get there until I install something like that. So let's get to the technical part of the video. All right, just in case you haven't been following along, let me show you what I've got real quick. This box right here is my motherboard. This is my CPU, and this is an Asus motherboard. This CPU in the middle here is the 3930K, and it's an i7. My GPU, which connects out to my monitor, is a GTX 680. And then I've got 4 sticks of RAM, so I'm occupying 4 of these slots, and they're 8 gig a piece, so I've got a total of 32 gig, and they're running at 1600 megahertz. Over here, I've got my operating system and my programs like Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve on my SSD, which is about 240 gig. My media drive, and so this is actually called my C drive. My media drive, which I've declared as my M drive, is a regular hard drive at 3 terabytes, and it holds all my media, my footage. My scratch drive, which I've labeled my S drive, is an SSD. It handles all these small cache, media cache, all that stuff is going to my scratch drive. And then where I export to is a 1 terabyte regular hard drive, which I've labeled my E drive. All right, really quick before we start, I wanted to let you know where my level of expertise is when it comes to computers, hardware, software, setting this stuff up. Really quick, my mom, I love her, but my mom would be at the bottom of this chart. At the top of this chart, you might have some people that work for Adobe, maybe some people that work for Intel. They know so much stuff, I don't even know what they know, So where do I fit in here? I've had a computer probably since 1983. PC-wise, I've had lots of computers. Maybe I fit somewhere around here, maybe. But I don't know, maybe somebody like, I have no idea, somebody like Juan Salvo.
There's a great podcast, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, that I listen to. Very knowledgeable on, GTX cards, computers. He's a colorist, so maybe I'm somewhere right here. So when you watch this, just keep that in mind. So when you're building a system, you want to make sure there's no bottlenecks in your system. What are bottlenecks? Basically, if I had a container and I took the bottom off the container, this would all come out very fast. If I took the bottom off of here, the water, or data in our case, will come out very slowly. So you want to have a balanced system, because if you've got one particular item, let's say it's your CPU, which is running very slow and everything else is very fast, well, you're kind of wasted all your money on all those fast items because your CPU can't keep up with the rest of them. So I'm looking for a balanced system. One of the first indexes we can take a look at, which I don't know if is very accurate or not, but is the Windows Experience Index. And it's got no theoretical limit to it, but mine comes in at 7.8. And if you look at the graphic here, you'll notice that my GPU, the CPU, the RAM, all that stuff has very similar numbers. So based off Microsoft's methodology, I have a very balanced system. All right, one of the first things we do when we edit video is we open up our NLE, in this case Premiere Pro. So what I want to show you here is how the information gets bounced around, and again, we're looking for bottlenecks. I can open Premiere in 6 seconds. To me, that's not that big of a deal. It could open in 15 seconds. I really wouldn't care, because this is something I do once. But I just want to show you the flow. So basically, this is a SATA 6 gig connection that I've connected from my SSD, which has my operating system and my programs, including Premiere Pro. So we've got to get the program over from here onto the motherboard, into the RAM, CPU kind of thing. So this particular hard drive is an SSD, and it can go at 508 megabytes per second. So in terms of this big pipe, if we got 6 gig, we're only using just a fraction of it. And if this is water or data or whatever analogy you want to say, but basically the information is flowing from here onto the motherboard. So the first thing I want to point out is when you load the operating system for the first time, or just boot up basically, you're using about 2 gig just for the operating system. Now when you load Premiere Pro, you're adding to that another 250 meg. So if you've only got 4 gig of RAM, you're kind of already running into problems. You're not going to be very happy, because what's going to happen is you're going to start swapping data around to your hard drives and stuff, and it's just not a very good experience. So the first recommendation I would have, if you've got 4 gig, get a lot more. In my case, I've got 32 gig, and some people might say that's overkill, but we're going to show you some results of some tests that I've done later that I think will show that 32 is not that much. Okay, or is very usable. The next thing I want to show you is a recommendation on your operating system and your programs. It does open in 6 seconds, which is very nice, but everything just responds so much faster. So, and the price of SSDs have come down so much. In my case, I have a 240 gig, but you can get much smaller, and probably cost you 120 bucks or something like that to get a really fast SSD for your operating system. So pretty much here, going from here to here, opening Premiere, we really don't have any bottlenecks. All right, now that we've loaded Premiere Pro, let's open a really large Premiere Pro file and do something a little bit more challenging. In this case, we're going to open a Premiere file that has over 200 clips in it. So basically what we've already done is we've loaded our operating system and programs over onto the motherboard, and we've already used 2 or 3 gig of stuff into the RAM. Next up, what I'm going to do is I've connected my media drive with a SATA 3 gig connection, and it's peaking out when I do this speed test. This flow of information over into the RAM is going around 98 megabytes per second. That's peaking. It's actually sometimes going much slower. And this whole process took 40 seconds to load this 200 clip file. So I thought to myself, well, let's try something else, because maybe it can be a little bit faster. So what I did is I transferred all of that information onto my scratch drive. And then the scratch drive it has a very fat pipe of 6 gig, and the transfer went this direction, and we were peaking out at 360 megabytes per second, and it took a total of 13 seconds, so much, much faster. So when this was happening off of my regular media drive, my hard drive, the CPU wasn't working that hard, maybe 15 to 25% going up and down. But when I transferred all the information to my SSD, now the GPU is getting a little bit more of a workout. It was going between 40 and 50% used. So my first recommendation here is if you're doing a lot of stuff with not many clips, maybe say 5 or 10 clips, you can be totally fine with a media drive that has just basically a regular hard drive that spins maybe at 7,200 RPM. I think that's pretty much the normal. And because it's not going to take very long to transfer, it's going to only take a few seconds to load all your information. But if you're doing something that has maybe, in my case, these 200 clips was about 30 gig of stuff, in that case, you could put it on like an SSD, and then the SSD will transfer, obviously much faster. So one of the things you might get away with not having is a RAID system right here, because you can double up or triple up, or you could have 10 different drives and a bunch of different RAID configurations that would make this flow of information much faster. Now this happens when you have really big projects. But if you want, you could just offload it to your scratch drive and then work right off your scratch drive. All right, we got Premiere loaded into the motherboard. We've got our media in there. Next step, maybe if you're working with really small project files, you've never noticed this, but what happens in the background is things start to conform after you've done an import. So basically, the media off our media drive goes to the RAM, and then the CPU kind of chews on it a bit, and then what happens is it sends it out to our scratch drive. At least that's the way I have it set up on my system. And it makes these very small files, preview files, database, peak files for the audio, a bunch of different little files go on the scratch drive. And then this whole process, taking the media, importing it, and conforming it, sending it out to the scratch drive, took 21 minutes for this 200 clip file. It takes quite a while. So I asked myself again, what happens if I switch it and I put this here and I put this here? So basically now this becomes my scratch drive, which is my hard drive, and my SSD becomes my project or media. And when I reversed it, and then the flow of information now was going this way and then back to that drive, which was the hard drive, then it only took 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So a big improvement. So does this really matter? If you've got lots of small files that don't have many clips, maybe it really doesn't matter, because it only happens once. All that stuff gets written to. Next time you open Premiere, it doesn't have to conform it. You can just start working. And that's another thing. When it takes 21 minutes, you feel like you want to start working, and it's working in the background. But over the years, I've learned that I don't like to do that because it's crashed on me, because I'll start doing something complex with a lot of effects and stuff on the clip, and the audio is not there yet because you can't hear anything because it hasn't conformed the audio yet. So I recommend not working while it's doing the conforming process. So you pretty much, for 20 minutes, you're gonna have to go get something to drink or something like that, or find something else to do. But if you have it on a scratch drive, it goes a lot faster. So the other thing I want to talk about is RAM. When I loaded this 200 clip file into my RAM up here, it went from 3 gig, just having Premiere on there, all the way up to 10 gig. The CPU wasn't really working that hard when it was conforming. It was only working out at 10%, and then the GPU wasn't working at all. So in this case, our bottleneck is definitely the hard drive versus the SSD. So this is just not pulling information off of it fast enough. All right, next up I want to do something a lot more taxing. I watched a Adobe TV promo video, whatever, where they had this Xeon 2600, I think it was a 2600, and they were playing 12 streams back smoothly. Well, that processor is $2,000. The processor I'm using in the $500 range. So I wanted to see what I could do with my DSLR footage. Again, I think they were using DSLR, maybe some RAW. I can't remember the example exactly. So what I did here is I'm pulling from my media drive, which is a hard drive, spinning at 7,200 RPM. I overclocked at 3.8, which is not much. It's not even working the CPU hard in terms of overclocking. I did 5 streams smoothly. The CPU is running at 55 to 70%, and I was using 11 gig of RAM. So again, I wanted to ask myself, 5 streams, that's pretty good. Let's see what we can do with an SSD. So I transferred all the information over to the SSD, and then what I was getting off of the SSD was a lot different. Same overclock, I was able to get 8 streams of DSLR footage. It was peaking out around 101 megabits per second. CPU is working harder because it had more information to deal with, 65 to 75%, using much harder. And the RAM was going at 25 gig, which is awesome because again, I'm getting to use more of my RAM that I bought, justifying that purchase. So over here, I decided to bump it up even more. Now I'm overclocking at 4.3 gigahertz. And now I'm back to using the regular hard drive for my media drive. I was able to get 8 streams smoothly just by overclocking. And you can overclock this thing even more. I know some people have gone to like 5. I think Harm has gone to 4.7. I'm trying to get up a little bit higher, maybe a 4.5, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet. So you might be asking, well, where is the GPU in all this? What's happening with the GPU? It's doing nothing, zip, because all of these things that we're transferring over are DSLR footage with absolutely no effects on them. So the Mercury playback engine, in terms of how many CUDA cores we've got in that 680, nothing is being utilized because this is all the workhorse of the CPU. GPU is not getting a workout at all because all I'm trying to do here is just to see what it's like without any effects on it. Obviously, when you start adding effects on it, the GPU will start working if you have that CUDA enabled. So in conclusion here, I wanted to point out too, all these streams, I'm running at full res. Not half, not quarter quality, but full res in Premiere Pro. So with an SSD, pulling it from an SSD, you can do more with the CPU. And the CPU in this case is definitely the bottleneck. So buying a really good CPU, I can't afford a $2,000 CPU. So this $500 CPU is actually working pretty good for me. So you can do more with that CPU if you use an SSD or you have a RAID array on your media drives. Again, 32 gig is really nice to have because we've already used 25 gig during that playback process. And some of you might be thinking, Dave, do you ever play back 9 or 10 streams at once? And not really, I don't. But if you're gonna do a lot of blending modes, you're doing compositing, green screen work, any of that stuff, it starts to add up very quickly. If you have more and more tracks stacked up on top of each other, those streams coming off the hard drive onto your motherboard is definitely gonna get taxed out by your CPU. So do you not need a RAID if you're overclocking? That's a really good question. I don't know, I'm still experimenting with this. Versus how much, the information coming off of here onto the motherboard, if I'm not doing that many streams and I'm overclocking it, again, I can get 8 streams off the hard drive. It's just amazing. So in the future, this has worked all great for my DSLR footage, but in the future, when I get a RAW camera, which might be a couple of years from now, might be 18 months from now, like my prediction, but in that case, I'm guessing you're really gonna need either a very large SSD or you're gonna need a RAID array configuration on your media drive. All right, next up, we're gonna export, which is gonna really work the system hard. In fact, most of the benchmark tests you'll ever see is the export. So what I've got here is I've drawn this a bit differently. Up at the top is my media drive, 3-pair drive, all the clips are on it. And it's transferring into the RAM about 7 megabytes per second. And it's filling up the RAM pretty darn fast. Then we've got the CPU chunking around and rendering and doing its goodness and then sending it out to the my E drive, which is my export drive, which is a 1 terabyte hard drive. So this whole process here, I've got 32 gig of RAM, so it fills it up. CPU is basically like a quarterback just got sacked. It's like on the ground, can barely get up. because it's maxed out. It's like doing 100% on all cores. And I have 6 cores. What's really interesting about this is there's no bottleneck getting the information from the media drive into the RAM. That wasn't a problem because the RAM fills up, no big deal right there. Plenty enough RAM. CPU obviously is the bottleneck here because what's happening is the transfer rate going from, in this pipe right here are these, if you watch it, these little peaks that happen, and they're about 1 megabyte byte. Sorry, I keep getting those backwards. It's byte. Sorry, not bit. So if I screwed that up before, I apologize. Anyway, there's these spikes happening as the information goes into the E drive. So the bottleneck is not this pipe, this SATA 3 gig pipe, and it's definitely not the hard drive. It's definitely the CPU is the bottleneck. So again, I like to try different things. So what I tried next is I said, well, what if I put an SSD here just to make sure? And sure enough, I got the exact same result. And you might be asking, well, where is the GPU in all of this? And basically I didn't really look at that. I was just looking at the bottleneck here because the GPU was getting used because I did have some effects on it. And it was peaking out around sometimes 91% load. But we'll get to the GPU in a minute. The other real interesting thing is just overclocking the CPU, because just to verify that this is the bottleneck, is if I had it at 3.2, it took 2 minutes and 8 seconds to run this particular file. And then when I overclocked at 4.5 gig, I did it at 1 minute and 48 seconds, which was a 10% improvement in terms of speed. So again, I can't emphasize enough, the CPU, spend your money on a really good CPU. In this case, I have a 6-core RAM. Again, what's really interesting about this is after I did the whole entire render, what was really interesting is when I played it back, I was looking at my hard drive to see if this particular hard drive was doing anything. And it wasn't. There was no information coming off of it. It was all that video was stalled in the RAM. So when I just sent it out to my display to watch it, it was all being pulled from the RAM that particular time. I'm sure if I had shut down my machine and started to back up again, it would pull from the hard drive, but really interesting. The whole entire file was coming out of RAM. All right, let's finally talk about the GPU. My GPU is a GTX 680, which is pretty expensive. I don't know, it's like 550 bucks or so. So a lot of people say, Dave, it's kind of overkill. So let's take a look. Here's Premiere Pro. I got the program monitor. I've got 4 tracks stacked on top of each other, each one with a fast color corrector, sharpening, and curves applied. All of these are CUDA core enabled effects. All right, so what I did is I said, okay, in the program monitor, with just a regular, I'm just playing it back kind of thing. Without CUDA, the GPU is working at 85%, so it's working really hard. The GPU is like, oh, I'm trying. The quarterback is just about to get sacked. Now, with the CUDA enabled Mercury Playback Engine hardware, the CPU all of a sudden went from 85% down to 30%. So all of a sudden the quarterback's like, oh, thank you, I can now throw that touchdown pass. I should be doing like plays on a field. Sorry, too much football references. But what was really interesting during this whole playback process of 4 tracks with these type of effects, the GPU was not even breaking a sweat. It's like having a pina colada on a beach somewhere, just taking it easy. So next thing is, all right, let's give this GPU or GTX card a workout. So I downloaded Luxmark benchmark, and I got a score of 680. Don't know if that's good or not, but what was interesting is the GPU is working at 72% power. Then I said, okay, let me try one of my videos, which is called The Store. You probably maybe have watched it. And it was doing 7 to 14%, and it had a lot of effects on each track. Then I did 8 picture-in-picture with effects on it, and it was running at, the GPU was running at 30%. What was really interesting in that same particular one, when I add shadow and highlights, for some reason the GPU just said, oh, I give up. effect because the shadow and highlights is not a CUDA-Core supported effect. So it seemed to just bring everything down for some reason and made the CPU work harder. But really where you get your money's worth out is when you render. When I rendered the store, it was peaking out at 91% in terms of load, and that was using the GPU-Z benchmarking tool or whatever it's called. But what really is interesting is right here. When I rendered the store, which have a lot of heavy effects on it, without any CUDA-Core hardware turned on, it took 2 minutes and 53 seconds. With it, 23 seconds. Huge improvement. So is it overkill? That is a really good question. Depends on your point of view. Is spending that kind of money overkill on a GPU? Well, if you render a lot, I'd say no. It's definitely worth it, especially if you're putting a lot of different effects on each track. If you're somebody that doesn't use many effects, yeah, it's definitely overkill. If you don't render that much, yeah, it's overkill. But for me, I love it. And also, when you go into DaVinci Resolve, the GTX 680 is definitely working harder. All right, speaking of overkill, I want to talk about 3 more topics really quick. DaVinci Resolve is actually one of the reasons why I built this whole new computer, because I started using it and it just didn't work very well. My experience was rather miserable. So on the GPU side, because everybody says, a lot of people have made the comments, Dave, your GPU is overkill. Well, in DaVinci, I was getting about a 71% peak load on the GPU when I was adding about 4 different nodes. And if you guys don't know what DaVinci Resolve is, it's basically a color correction type of program that's really powerful and it's free. So if you're not using it, go download the light version. It's just awesome. But really one of the big benefits is when you have, like, let's say a curve setup and you put maybe a dot here and a dot here, and then when you start to, with your mouse or whatever you're using, you start to massage up and down, or because color correction I'm finding is a lot of push-pull. And if you have to wait when you bring up the curve, let's say to look like this, when you bring it up here, you might have to wait a whole entire second for it to actually react. You actually see the difference on the program monitor. But when you have the GTX 680, it's like instantaneous. I can bring up and down this part, up and down all over the place, stretch it however I want, and I can get those results really quickly. So for me, with DaVinci, my GPU, I'd say it's not overkill for me. RAM, 32 gig. I've had some comments from people saying it's overkill. Well, now that I've got more RAM, I'm gonna actually start using After Effects more, because it was kind of again, a miserable experience using After Effects with not much RAM. When I loaded one particular file and I did a RAM preview, it kicked all the way up to 29.3 gig in the RAM. It just went through the roof. So if you're doing lots of RAM previews, having lots of RAM, I might even go to 64 someday if I get doing more After Effects. And the next item I want to talk about in terms of overkill, I got a lot of comments, was the power supply unit, PSU. I bought a 760 watt, and it's a platinum, so it's the, like, not gold, but it's platinum in terms of efficiency, very efficient. A lot of people said, no, Dave, you need 1,000 watts. This one I'm really confused on, because I'd get people say you're fine, and then some experts will actually tell me, no, you really should have gotten 1,000 watts. But when I overclocked, my highest overclock at 4.3, I was using max on my kilowatt meter plugged into my computer. The max I got was 376, which is less than half. So don't quite understand that, but it seems to be working fine. If I ever have any problems with it, I'll replace the power supply. All right, really quick, I want to talk about 2 other programs that I really like, Lightroom and Photoshop. I live in Lightroom, love it. What's really interesting is GTX 680 hardly got any workout in Lightroom. Didn't even, like, break a sweat. Same thing with Photoshop. GPU hardly did anything. And so I thought to myself, well, I'll use liquefy and just send it all around the screen as fast as I can and see what happens. And again, GPU didn't even seem to be affected, which is really odd. Then it came up another question that I tried with Premiere Pro and DaVinci, was overclocking the GPU. And this one is very overclockable. A lot of the gamers love it. And, you know, I would be a gamer, but if I knew if I would start playing games like, you know, all those different great first-person shooter games, I probably would get any work done. So that's why I'm not a gamer. But I tried overclocking the GPU several times and a lot of different tests, and it seemed to make absolutely no difference whatsoever. DaVinci, Premiere Pro, rendering. Maybe somebody else can help me with that one, but I didn't see any difference at all.
So that's pretty much it. I'm glad you stuck around this long to watch the rest of this video. I know it's really long. Now that I'm done with it, I can get back to more creative stuff, and I'm going to be working, finishing up my T3i video course as well. So that's pretty much it. Hope you got some value out of this very long video. All right, talk to you later. Bye.